So heart conduction. We're going to talk about the pathway first. As we already see in this picture, the electrical signals that cause the heart to beat are going to start in the SA node, the sinoatrial node. It's going to go throughout the atria, so that's going to cause the atria to contract. Then it's going to go meet up at the AV node, the atrioventricular node, so that's between the atria and the ventricles. And then there's a little area on this picture right here, that's the bundle of His, okay? And then that's going to split into the left and the right bundle branches. The left bundle branch will innervate, cause conduction of the electrical signal to the left ventricle, and the right bundle branch goes to the right ventricle. And then at the end, you're going to have these Purkinje fibers here, okay? And then that's going to diffuse throughout the ventricles. So first of all, the AV node has a pause in conduction, and that's important. It's because of slow calcium channels, and the reason why it pauses is because it's going to allow the atria to contract fully. So remember, the atria are contracting right before you get to the AV node, and you want that atria to fully empty all that blood inside, so you're going to have a little pause. The other function it serves is it's going to serve as a gatekeeper of conduction from the atria to the ventricles. Because as we're going to see later, sometimes you can have abnormally rapid atrial rhythms. So your atria is going to go crazy, maybe your sinoatrial node goes crazy and is beating really fast. Well, you don't want your actual heart to beat really fast. You don't want your ventricles to beat really fast and go crazy. So your AV node, your atrioventricular node, is going to serve as a gatekeeper, and it's not going to let that happen because it's going to have a pause in conduction. Now I want to cover the speed of conduction real quick. The Purkinje fibers are the fastest speed of conduction, and this is the fibers throughout the ventricles. And the reason why they are very fast is they allow for that diffusion of the electrical signal from these left and right branches throughout all the ventricles. So you see your ventricles very, very diffuse, very expansive. So you need those Purkinje fibers that go to all of the ventricle to transmit signal very quickly, so you can have an organized contraction of the whole ventricle. You want the whole ventricle to contract at the same time, so you're going to be a very fast conduction. After that is the atrial muscle, and then the ventricles themselves, and then finally, remember the AV node is slow. Remember, the AV node is the gatekeeper. So I would advise that you memorize both of these, unfortunately. But at least you know it's easy to know that Purkinje is fast, AV node is slow, and then you go from the atria to the ventricles. So now let's keep going. Let's go into the myocardial action potential. Now this action potential is similar to the muscle's action potential. And we've talked about differences already in the musculoskeletal section, so I'm not going to cover that. I'm just going to go through the basic details. And we're going to start over here. This is called the resting potential. This is diastole. The heart's still filling up, it's resting. And this is determined by high potassium permeability of the membrane in the resting state. And the one thing to note is that the potential in the cardiac myocytes is around -90. Do you remember what it was in the skeletal muscle cells? It was -70. And the reason why we have this is the more negative resting potential helps prevent arrhythmias. Because now you have a larger stimulus. Let's say threshold is here. Now you need more stimulus to get from -90 to threshold. So you're less likely to just suddenly reach threshold and get arrhythmias. Okay, so let's say we eventually do reach threshold. What's going to happen is you're going to get to phase 0. This is called rapid depolarization. Thus, as you can see here, it's very rapid. It's almost straight up. And that's because you have voltage-gated sodium channels that open once you reach threshold. And sodium's going to go in. And remember, sodium's positive, so your potential is going to go up very quickly. However, they're very quickly inactivated, hence your duration is very short. Okay? The next step is brief repolarization. As you can see here, you go down a little bit. That's repolarization. That's because you have potassium that flow out of the cell. It's a transiently activated channel, hence it's brief. But potassium will leave the cell, so you're losing positive ions, so you're going to go down a little bit. And then eventually you're going to have more potassium channels opening. So you're going to increase that, but that's going to be balanced by calcium channels coming in. Those calcium channels are open slower. But eventually, so they're going to balance each other. So you can see it's very flat. This is called plateau, because plateaus are very flat. Finally, your calcium channels are going to close, but your potassium channels are slow. Your slow calcium channels are open. So calcium and potassium leaves, and so potassium's leaving, so your potential goes down, and that is called late rapid repolarization. So again, we have our resting potential maintained by high potassium permeability. Then once you reach threshold, you're going to hit the rapid depolarization phase with sodium entering the cell, and then brief repolarization with potassium leaving. And then finally you get to a plateau with potassium leaving, calcium entering, and that's going to balance each other. And finally we have late rapid repolarization. That's because you have late potassium channels that open when potassium leaves, and your calcium channels are closed. So that is these are the myocardial action potential. These are the myocardial cells. These are the muscle cells in the heart. Now we're going to talk about pacemaker cells. So remember, we have the sinoatrial node, we have the AV node. Those cells have a different action potential. Okay, and there's a couple others. There's pacemakers at the bundle of His. There's pacemakers in the ventricles, and these have different action potentials than the cardiomyocytes, which are the muscle cells of the heart. Okay, the phases here that we're going to see are phase 4. Remember, phase 4 is similar as in both are the resting phases, but this one's different because it has something we call automaticity. That means that you don't have to wait for some other stimulus to shoot you above threshold and start everything off. These slowly depolarize by themselves. Okay, they have a slow influx, a slow inward current of sodium that's always on, that's going to cause them to go up and up and up, and eventually they're going to reach threshold by themselves. So they don't need an external stimulus. They don't need external action potential that comes along and triggers their action potential. They have their own. They have their automaticity. And this current here is termed the funny current. I don't know why, but that's what it's called. It's called the funny current, the sodium current. So once you reach threshold, what's going to happen? So I'm blocking phase 0. What's going to happen is you get the upstroke. As you can tell from the picture, you go up. And what happens here is that calcium channels will open. Note that in comparison to the cardiomyocytes, that upstroke was from the sodium channels, but here it's the calcium channels. And that makes sense. Your sodium channel is already open, so your calcium channel is going to come up, and you're going to cause depolarization. Finally, we see the repolarization phase. That's phase 0. That's phase 3. This is similar in that your calcium channels are going to close and your potassium channels are going to open. So, pacemaker rates. We talked about there's multiple pacemakers. So your fastest pacemaker is your sinoatrial node. The fastest pacemaker is going to govern all the others. It's like the one ring to rule them all. And so the sinoatrial node is what's governing our heart rate. The next fastest one is the atrioventricular node. Remember, that one has a little delay. So it's between 45 to 55 beats per minute. And finally, the other cells, the bundle of His, the Purkinje fibers, ventricles are slower than that. They're like less than 40 beats per minute. So that, remember I said SA node fires the fastest, so it stifles impulse generation from the other pacemaker cells. However, if you have impaired conduction between the SA node and the AV node, then the AV node cells are going to take over. And they're going to be the king, and they're going to cause ventricular contraction by themselves. Now, the last thing I want to highlight is the key differences compared to myocytes and pacemaker cells. So pacemaker cells have this automaticity. They can generate their own action potential. That's a key characteristic of these guys. The other characteristic is that they have the negative 90. They have negative 60. The lowest voltage they have is negative 60. Remember that we said cardiomyocytes are the negative 90. And so the reason why it's negative 60 is this causes fast sodium channels to remain inactivated because it's too positive. Fast sodium channels activate around here, but you're staying above that, so they remain inactivated. Finally, the phase 0 here, remember the phase 0 in myocardial action potentials was the rapid depolarization, where you go almost straight up because of those fast sodium channels. This one is the slower calcium channels, so it's not as rapid, and it reaches a lower amplitude. Hence, these nodes have a delay in conduction. And the other things to note is that you don't have a phase 1 or phase 2. So that's the little what do you call it? The little early repolarization, and then you plateau. You don't have a early repolarization. You don't have a plateau in the pacemaker action potentials. So that's it for our action potentials and heart conduction.